I completely forgot. Not this one. Okay, so I want to launch a poll just because I'm curious. Have you seen Inside Out? It looks like a vast majority have. Nice. We're looking at 80%. Okay. Well, if you haven't seen it, I highly, highly recommend it. It's a fantastic movie. They did a lot of work making sure that it was accurate as far as how people express their emotions and experience their emotions. So we're going to go through each of the basic emotions really quick and share those with Inside Out. So I'm going to keep the chat open. Let me know if there's, last time we had some issues with the audio. Let me know if there are any issues with the audio in this, okay? I've never, what are those called? Accordions? I don't remember, but I've never seen someone smash one of those like a guitar. That's amazing. So comment in the chat for me. Let's think about emotions in terms of their evolutionary purpose. What could be the purpose of us having joy as a basic emotion? Accordion. Thank you, Elvis. So comment in the chat for me on that. What is the purpose of us having joy? Social bonding, survival, growth, reproductive success, relationships, non-threatening, social interaction. Yeah. So a lot of this revolves around the idea that it helps us form relationships. If I experience joy and share that with you, and at the same time, if you share your joy with me, we build a relationship. The other thing for us is to value rewards that we experience. So for instance, if you think back to days, caveman days, what those might be, if you get something like a resource and experience joy from that, you're experiencing a social reward or some type of reward for getting that resource, right? So it's good for us to associate joy with good things in our life. It actually kind of trains you to seek out those good things in life, right? Stress reliever, absolutely. All right, so that's joy. Now we're gonna move on to anger.
Your emotions. When things go wrong, anger is there. This is anger. He will make sure the world knows anger is in control. But what you really need to watch out for is when he's out of control. Get to know all your emotions with Disney Pixar.
Okay, so that's anger. I love the way they do anger in a suit and tie and all of that. That's great. So what is the purpose of anger? We can think a little bit about that. In babies, people use anger to let us know that they're not okay. You know, anger might propose them crying, or if something's not okay. I've heard of babies that, you know, are experiencing internal distress, digestive issues. They cry, they get angry, and they let their parents know they need help. And then at the same time, anger helps you maintain boundaries. Absolutely, you got it there, Dale. Yeah, anger helps you maintain boundaries. In some ways, and we'll talk about this in the aggression lecture, aggression is very adaptive. It helps you exert control over things. So for instance, losing a resource, having a reaction of anger and getting in conflict with someone else, sometimes you need to get in that conflict and experience that anger to beat someone, to say, I need this resource back. At the same time, yeah, it helps you fight against threats. If you have a social threat or a physical threat against you, anger can help you fight against that. So in those ways, anger is very, very adaptive. Protection. Anger is also protection, absolutely, Emily, in If you think about young kids and how mothers might be protective over them, anger is an emotion they might experience. I heard a story about back in the 90s about a young boy, and his uncle got really angry at him and spanked him. And his mom got really angry and upset, saying, "You can't spank my son, that's not okay." And that was his mother ultimately protecting him in that situation. So now let's talk about fear.
Your emotions. When the unexpected is staring you in the face, fear is there to keep you safe. With speed and wisdom, fear assesses the situation and settles your nerves in his own special way. He's got this. Thank you, fear. Get to know all your emotions with Disney.
So fear, there we go. This is a fun one. Comment in the chat again. What is the purpose of fear? Protection from harm, identify threats, survival. Absolutely. Fight or flight is an instinct on purpose. The ability of flight, yeah, running away. Fear helps us stay away from certain situations. Or, you know, you think about sometimes in an altercation, or you think back to that caveman example, if you're going up against someone who's bigger than you, fear might be adaptive in that you do step away. And in life, you know, we have these situations where my partner really wants to go skydiving, and I'm afraid of that. Technically, there is death if you don't have a parachute, right? But yeah, fear can be a very, very adaptive emotion. All right. By the way, I think they chose the perfect person to voice sadness. It's Phyllis from The Office, and she's amazing.
When life gets you down, that's when sadness takes over. This is sadness. With a caring touch and a kind heart, sadness leaps into action to let you... I said sadness leaps into action. Sadness? Oh, sadness. Get to know all your emotions with Disney Pixar.
Okay. Can anyone else relate to that bawling, like just being really, really sad? Because I definitely can. At different point. Yes, I agree with me. I want to watch Inside Out again too. Yeah, so sadness obviously can also be very, very adaptive. It's important for us to feel loss. It's important for us, just how it's good to feel joy when we gain resources. When we lose resources, it's also good for us to feel loss. At the same time, it goes with relationships too. There's a lot of value in our life of the caring for others and worrying about others. So sadness plays a very adaptive role, can play a very adaptive role in our lives. All right, and then our fifth emotion, disgust.
Emotions. Sometimes life gets a little dirty. That's when disgust takes over. This is disgust. Whether advising on your social life or on life's little messes, disgust is there to, well, get to know all your emotions with Disney Pixar's.
Yep, okay. Man, when did Inside Out come out? I can't remember. But okay, let me get back to the PowerPoint. So think about this, comment in the chat. What is the purpose of disgust? This is always probably the most interesting to me. Protection, yeah, avoiding certain situations. If you've ever had food poisoning, I can understand having a fear of the place that gave you food poisoning, essentially avoiding toxin, avoiding anything along that lines. If you think about mold, we're always worried about moldy food. Being able to have disgust about tasting that keeps you from getting sick. It's avoidance. It keeps you not dying from the plague, things like that. Absolutely. Especially in the realm of food, disgust is very, very adaptive. I've known people, you know, they get food poisoning from Taco Bell and then they never go back, of course. Even the food just disgusts them, right? So disgust keeps us alive, essentially. So you can see that all these emotions are very adaptive for different reasons. So there's a lot of descriptive charts. We've talked about 5 now, but don't we have a lot of different emotions that we could discuss? We don't just have 5 emotions, right? And if you just Google like emotions online, you'll get a ton of descriptive charts like this. a ton. Some of them go to 50 different emotions, some have 10. This one has 8, and it has things like accepted, aware. We didn't talk about those. In general, many people have tried to map our emotions. Unfortunately, though, we can identify markers of emotions, what they look like, but emotion itself is not readily defined. There's no consensus on this is how we define emotion. There's really no gold standard, but we can talk about some of the attributes of emotion. So generally, what is emotion? Well, these are the aspects of emotion that we generally accept. So emotions are biologically based. We see emotions in babies. Usually right when babies are born, they cry. A few days old, you can see babies laughing, doing these other things. So it's biologically based. Emotions also evolve in time, over time. They evolve in time in the individual. Again, you experience emotions differently than you did as an infant. And at the same time, emotions evolve across our society. What our society valued in emotional expression 100 years ago is likely different today. Therefore, we express our emotions differently than those individuals did. Emotions are also broadly labeled as a response system. This is sort of the first responder of life events. When you experience something, usually emotions are that first thing that helps you respond to that in some way, and it's instantaneous usually. And then emotions are often fluid and unseen. Emotions are a little bit like water. They're free flowing, they're flexible, they change over time. You can think about maybe an intense conversation you've had before in your life, right? You're talking to someone and everything they say might change your emotions just a little bit, right? And then you might think of something in that conversation to say, and that also alters your emotion in that situation. So really, these emotions are incredibly fluid. They change, they're very big, they're very small, all of that stuff. And emotions are often unseen. We don't tend to see emotions in other people initially. You can be experiencing 5 different things and be with a group of friends, and they have no idea that you're experiencing these things. I mean, I couldn't assume as the instructor, all of you are experiencing the exact same emotion right now. I mean, I might look through, I can look through the video feed and say, hey, I can see your expressions, but that doesn't mean you're all experiencing the same emotion, right? So we have probably all the emotions we've talked about represented in our classroom right now. So generally, emotions are commonly described as a tool by which we appraise experiences, register the significance of an experience, and respond to that experience. So emotions are really a way we use to understand our environment. I'm 28 years old, so the first major event that I remember growing up with is 9/11. And so I remember I was born in Oregon, so the towers were hit at 9 a.m. and it was 6 a.m. in Oregon. And I remember my brother waking me up saying, "Mom's crying, I don't understand why." So I ran into her room and she's crying, looking at the TV. And it made me very sad. I was very fearful because I didn't understand what that meant. And I remember the emotions attached to 9/11. And I remember the reports coming afterward, how the nation responded. And we've seen a lot of consequences of 9/11 since then in the last 19 years. But emotion is how I process that event. It's associated with fear, with my mom being sad, with the world and the US being concerned, different things like that. And then finally, emotion is a process. Emotion is a constant interaction between an individual and their environment. So one example of this would be a college party, socially distanced right now, of course. If you go to a college party and there's people there, you might see someone, you might be excited to go and you're experiencing excitement, joy, anticipation. And then you go to this party, maybe you see someone you really like that you haven't seen for a while. Because your environment and because of that person, you might experience joy. You might experience happiness. Then you might see someone that you don't really like, right? You kind of, no. Then you experience a different emotion. You might feel anger, you might feel frustration, and then an event might happen at the party that causes fear or disgust. If someone throws up, you may see disgust. So emotion is really a process that's an interaction between you and the environment you're in. And don't negate the fact that you also are influencing your environment in this situation too. You can express more joy to try to make the environment more joyful too. So emotion is also a process. So how do we experience emotion? Well, there are first primary emotions. These are the 5 we talked about, joy, disgust, fear, sadness, anger. We have these primary emotions that are evolutionary adaptive. These are shared across cultures and are associated with specific physical states. All right, some people also talk about surprise and contempt as potential primary emotions. Then we have secondary emotions. These are the blends of primary emotions. They can include remorse, guilt, shame, these different. So you think about, anger, and that's a primary emotion, right? But anger mixed disgust mixed with sadness, mixed with fear might create remorse or guilt, right? So think of it as the color wheel. You have your primary colors, that would be those 5 basic emotions, and then you have your secondary colors, which are a mix of those basic emotions. All right, so let's talk about some other noteworthy aspects of emotions. Why do we have them? What do they do? Well, individual goals drive our responses. So when you experience an emotion, a response to an event must be in service of a goal. I don't know if you guys have seen it. There's this hilarious YouTube video of this little boy, and he's about 2 years old. And he's laying on the floor crying, having a total meltdown, crying. And so his mom walks away and walks around the corner into another part of the room where he can't see her. The boy stops crying. He stands up. He walks to the other room. The second he sees his mom, he throws himself on the floor and starts bawling again. And this happens about 6 or 7 times in a 2-minute video. The boy stops crying, stands up. So what you see here is the boy had a goal of being comforted or getting something from his mom. Perhaps he was angry and trying to get her to give him a toy. So he had a goal here. So his response to that event was to cry. And then our perception of an event, especially the significance of an experience, determines the intensity of how we respond to that event. This is always, for me, kind of the definition of middle school. So if in middle school, we experience a ton more emotions, cognitive growth, and social lives are a little more complicated because of those things. So we tend to perceive things at that stage when we're experiencing more hormones as more significant than they are. Things like losing a game or having a fight with a friend in middle school is perceived as much more significant than maybe other times in your life. What that means is that the intensity of how you respond to that is different. And this is why we tend to think of maybe middle schoolers as a little more dramatic. Maybe they got into a fight with a friend and they totally melt down. It's because their perception is higher and it drives that response for them. Okay, so the interesting thing about emotions is that multiple behaviors can reflect a single emotion. So tensing your muscles, yelling, and hitting can all reflect anger. I saw this very clearly when I worked in a middle school classroom. It was a special education classroom where all the kids, it was self-contained, so the kids had to stay there all day, and they had behavioral issues. And so we had one student who was literally afraid of math class. And so that fear he expressed in multiple behaviors. He would yell at us, he would run out of the room, he would try to steal his peers' stuff to get in trouble. He had all these behaviors because he was afraid of math class and he was trying to get out of math. At the same time, we have the flip side. A single behavior can reflect multiple emotions. So you can cry to reflect anger, you can cry to reflect sadness, and you can also cry to reflect joy. Okay, so we've talked about emotions. We know that we experience emotions. Now I want to dive into emotion regulation, which is how we regulate our emotions. There's a lot of disagreement in the field about what exactly is emotion regulation. So here are a couple theories. Emotion regulation might be processes by which individuals influence their emotions, basically. Which ones they have, when they have them, and how they experience or express those emotions. So when I was a basketball player, and if someone scored on me, I would get angry, obviously. But I might change how I react to that, because if I punch someone during a basketball game, I'm going to get kicked out. So I might influence that emotion of anger and either push it off, not experience it, or funnel it into how I play the game, and that's expressing their emotion. Other people, Campos has said, maybe emotion regulation is a set of processes where people generate an emotion and, what was this? Oh yeah, generate an emotion and manage that emotion. So it's not just like influencing the emotion. It's a process where you generate an emotion and then it's followed by management of that emotion. The management of emotion in Campos's case doesn't happen before you experience the emotion, but it's generating an emotion and then managing that emotion. Other people have said, well, maybe it's modifying a process that generates emotions, or it's behavioral manifestation. So again, in the case of that little boy I was talking about who cried, and then when his mom left the room, he got up, walked out, and found her. Maybe it's a process of generating that fear and crying, and then the behavioral manifestation, and then changing it when his mom leaves the room. And then finally, Cole talked about, well, maybe emotion regulation is marked by changes in a current emotion or changes in other processes. Maybe it's not just emotions, maybe it's others. He was referring to it, maybe it's regulating your current emotion, saying, I'm angry, I should be fearful. Let me switch to that fear. Or it could also be shifting your attention. You know, when I worked when I observed in preschools, you could see some kids, like, they'd be playing, maybe they would have, you know, toys, maybe they'd have a car, and all of a sudden a peer would come up and take the car. No way, right? Maybe the kid will just shift his attention to another toy because he's angry about that. Or maybe he'll change his emotion to anger. He went from joy to anger because, hey, somebody took my toy. And honestly, those are high stakes in a preschool classroom. There are only so many toys to go around. So there are all these different ideas about what is emotion regulation. Generally, this is the most broad definition that is supposed to encompass all of that. It's the lay terms definition. Emotion regulation is behaviors and skills, both conscious and unconscious, that modulate, inhibit, or enhance emotions and experiences as a means to accomplish goals and function in our society. So it's essentially strategies to deal with our emotions. That's emotion regulation, is ways, and as I've said before, you can't act like a baby or a toddler in a college classroom, especially when you're in in-person classes. You can't lay on the floor, cry, and get mad. You regulate those emotions. So it's strategies to deal with our emotions. Okay. So emotions and emotion regulation co-occur at the same time. What we know is that emotions are not pure, so they're unregulated. So they're not unregulated. So as I said, you could go to a college party or setting and say, okay, I'm experiencing joy, and then anger, and then happiness, and then fear. You can experience a lot of different emotions. They shift, and you don't experience maybe pure anger. What is pure anger? You just experience maybe anger and fear mixed together. But we're constantly regulating the emotions we experience based on our environment. So emotions do not exist without us regulating them. So if you think about why a baby cries, again, to be fed, to be taken care of. Babies can cry because they're angry, but then their mom takes care of them. This is an emotion expression and emotion regulation at the same time. Okay, emotion regulation can occur, and this is important. Emotion regulation can occur before an emotion is experienced. It can prevent an emotion from occurring, or it can change the quality of an emotion you're experiencing. So that's a lot. So for instance, you can think about a job interview and going into a job interview. You're probably thinking about how to regulate your emotions before you're even in the room. Before you experience, like, you think, what if I get a question that I don't know how to answer? You're thinking about ways to regulate your response and your emotion ahead of time, right? Sometimes too, you can say emotion regulation. Oh, a family dinner's coming up and maybe you're not getting along with one member of your family. You can say, don't get mad at this person. I'm not going to do that. Don't get mad. So you can try to prevent an emotion from occurring. And you can also change the quality of an emotion. So you can say, you know, this person makes me really, really angry. I'm going to try not to get, it doesn't matter. The anger doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they think. So it's not a high quality thing. I'm not going to get as angry with them. So let's look at how this might play out. So the case of inhibition. So in some cases, we have to inhibit one response in favor of others. So we use emotions and emotion regulation co-occurring to inhibit something. You can think of this as the classic toddler in the grocery store. Basically, a toddler in a grocery store might say, I want a toy, and mom says, hey, we can't get that. And so the toddler's response and emotion is to get angry and throw a fit and cry and scream, and it's essentially to see if the mom gets embarrassed. This is emotion regulation. The toddler is saying, I'm angry and I'm showing it because I want to get what I want. Now, oftentimes, what I've heard is moms will leave the store. They'll leave their cart, they'll leave to let the toddler know, no, this doesn't work. You can't do that. Then when they go back to the store, a kid might again ask, hey, can I have this toy? And the mom says no. They might respond differently. They might inhibit that anger or respond in a different way, maybe asking again or trying some other strategy. Before responding to an event, we assess our capacity to do so. In other cases, we think about that idea of where are my emotions at right now? I'm in a fight with my friend. I don't know what that's going to look like when we're together. So do I have the capacity to address this anger, address this fight? So emotion responses can also be manipulated even before an event occurs. So that's like the job interview, thinking about how am I going to respond if I get a question that I don't understand. And then this really dives down to optimization. We choose our environments to maximize our desired emotions and minimize undesired emotions. We do things we enjoy. You might pick hobbies that you enjoy. You hang out with people that might give you joy or happiness. We tend to maximize the emotions we desire and minimize undesired emotions. So this is emotions in context. We choose the context in which we live. So again, emotions and emotion regulation co-occur. Okay, so what does this actually look like? Let's walk through it. So there's an event. Don't know what it is, but we evaluate the significance of that event for our individual goals. Then we determine our capacity to respond. I'd say, where am I at today? Did I get good sleep? Am I feeling like I can respond to this? And then we narrow down our list of appropriate responses. So you evaluate the significance of an event, determine your capacity to respond, and then make a list in your head of appropriate responses. Well, I could do A, I could do B, I could do C. So really, an event happens and you have emotion and emotion regulation occurring at the same time. It's a recursive process. So at the same time, you're thinking, you're determining your capacity, you're narrowing your appropriate responses, you're doing these at the same time. And then this is your emotional and behavioral response, all right? So event occurs in which you have an emotion and you're also regulating your emotions at the same time. And then you experience an emotional or behavioral response. I see some people taking notes, so I'll give you a second on this.
Bethany, we also have a question in the chat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't had the chat open. Okay, what is the difference between manipulation of an emotion and the process of maximizing and minimizing for optimal results? Well, I think they're really the same. Manipulating an emotion can look like maximizing your positive. Well, okay, so you could get to a situation where manipulating emotions can mean a lot of different things. It's very broad. So you can be experiencing any emotion, and any change to that you decide to make can be a manipulation, right? Maximizing and minimizing is a little bit different. It's a very specific way to manipulate your emotions, right? So think of manipulating an emotion as a broad idea, and then maximizing and minimizing for optimal results as a very specific thing. So you can maximize saying, I enjoy experiencing joy. My goal is to be happy and experiencing joy. So I'm gonna maximize time with people that give me joy and minimize time with people who don't give me joy. Now, you'll also have some maladaptive processes of this. You might have someone who says, honestly, maybe I enjoy drama. And so maybe I hang out, the desired thing for me is to experience drama. So maybe I hang out with people that maximize drama in my life, which maximizes anger, sadness. So manipulation of emotion is a broad umbrella. And then you have maximizing and minimizing, which can be adaptive or maladaptive under that umbrella. Okay? Okay. Doesn't look like any other questions. Thanks, Sinchar. Just let me know. I don't have the chat open right now.
Yep, no worries.
Okay. All within context, yes. This is all depending on the context you're in. You are going to react differently if you are having a family dinner, if you're waiting for the bus, if you're in class, if you're with a group of friends. This is going to look different based on your context. All right, so where are we now with all of this? So we know that emotions can both regulate our responses, and they can also be regulated by activating our emotions in a way. So emotions can regulate and they can be regulated depending on the situation. Emotion regulation is a process by which emotions are altered. So emotion regulation is where we, basically what you're talking about, manipulating our emotions. It's a process where they change, where we change them. And then emotions and emotion regulation co-occur at the same time, such that the emotion influences the regulatory behavior, and simultaneously the regulatory behavior shapes the emotion, right? So your emotions shape your behavior and the regulation of that, and the regulation shapes your emotion. All right, so this is sort of our conclusion from emotion and emotion regulation. So if you wanted a big conclusion for all of that, it's this. Simply put, emotion regulation is a process of increasing or decreasing our positive and or negative emotions in response to a situation. All right, so that's what emotion regulation is. Let's debunk some thoughts about this. Okay, so a lot of people say, okay, emotion regulation is great. It must be a gatekeeper for negative emotions. So we tend to have a common belief, particularly in an American cultural context, that we only need emotion regulation to minimize or get rid of our negative emotions. And we think that displaying negative emotion indicates a lack of emotion regulation. So what we'll say is, oh, kids throw temper tantrums. Like I said in the store, this toddler might say, I want this toy, I'm gonna throw a temper tantrum, right? And so we look at that and say, that's a lack of emotion regulation, you know? And that's the primary goal of emotion regulation, is to stop us from throwing temper tantrums. In our society, if we did throw temper tantrums all the time, it'd be hard to get anything done, right? Even at college, if we had 50 people when you're walking on the quad throwing a temper tantrum, it'd be harder to walk across the quad. But what about positive emotions? It's good for us to regulate those negative behaviors sometimes, those negative emotions sometimes. But Are there circumstances where we would need to regulate our positive emotions? Think about laughter. One of my favorite things to do is, I'm a huge TV movie nerd, is to watch blooper reels. You know, if you have not, by the way, if you haven't seen Brooklyn Nine-Nine, fantastic show. I highly recommend it. It's a sitcom. The creators of Parks and Rec and The Office created this show. Has Andy Samberg, who is in SNL. It's amazing. But generally with these types of shows, you can go on YouTube and watch a blooper reel. And basically, a blooper reel breaks down to lack of emotion regulation. This is too funny. I can't stop laughing. I can't get this scene down. This is to the point where they actually charge actors and actresses if they laugh too much. They charge them money. So this happened like in Harry Potter. Yeah, it's crazy. Where Emma Watson couldn't stop laughing during a scene, so they charged her like $5,000 or something crazy because she couldn't stop laughing and they have to get it down. So we also use emotion regulation to manage our positive emotions. Another example of this is we have some really, really good friends who their son is 14 years old. He's my favorite 14-year-old. He's awesome. But his dad was talking to him, being stern, telling him about something, and this kid could not stop laughing. He knew it was a serious situation, and in his head, he's thinking, this is the worst possible time to laugh. And he started laughing, and he couldn't regulate his emotions. And I talked to him about it later, and he was saying that, you know, sometimes I just can't help it right now. If I think I'm not supposed to laugh in this situation, I can't regulate that emotion. And I can so relate because I was the same way as a teenager. I don't know if any of you guys had that experience, but it was the worst to be talking to one of your parents or someone and have that. Okay. It's 3:48. Let's see. Let's take our 10-minute break right now. Yes, 9-9, Lord, thank you. Okay. Let's take our 10-minute break. Well, please come back at 4 o'clock. That's a 12-minute break. So we'll take that. Yeah, I'll see you in 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 4 o'clock. All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. This is one thing I miss about teaching in person is obviously it's a lot easier because I'm in front of everybody, but thank you. All right, so we talked about emotion regulation related to positive emotions. So let's expand on this idea. Emotion regulation is one aspect of a broader construct commonly referred to as self-regulation. And this is the broad area in which I do most of my research. So self-regulation encompasses a lot of different things: self-control, effortful control, executive functioning, behavior inhibition, cognitive control. There we go. All these different things. It's been talked about in all these different ways. Let's define it. What is self-regulation? You're going to see parallels here to emotion regulation in the definition. Some people talk about self-regulation as this mix of managing your emotions, focusing your attention, and inhibiting behaviors, all of which go towards meeting societal standards. So we can regulate our emotions, but there's other part of us, right? You can be perfectly regulating your emotions, but also have to focus your attention. You can also need to regulate your behavior. You know, you can feel regulating your emotions in class, but also be going like, you know, crazy like that or something. So maybe there's more than just emotion regulation, and this is saying it's the mix of emotions, focusing your attention, and inhibiting some behavior. Other people have said, I just think maybe it's inhibiting any dominant response you might have to an event in favor of a subdominant one, otherwise known as effortful control. So this is just anytime you have a response to an event that happens, how you inhibit that is self-regulation. Okay, that's what it is. And then other people might say that self-regulation is a mix of cognitive and behavioral skills. It's managing those. They don't point out the emotion piece. It's just cognitive and behavioral. It's focusing your attention, it's using your working memory, it's focusing on impulse control. A lot of kindergarten and first grade is highly focused on impulse control in young children. So as you can see, a lot of people have different ideas about what self-regulation might be. And again, similar to emotion regulation, there's really no clear consensus. This might have to do with the fact that the measurement of self-regulation is so varied. There's a lot of debate about what self-regulation is. And this might have to do with the fact that emotion or self-regulation is very important for a lot of different fields. This is taken from a 2015 study that did a meta-analysis of 30,000 participants. They took a bunch of studies basically and said, how are people measuring self-regulation? So they have clinical psychology, neuropsych, cognitive psychology, developmental, personality, educational, and lifespan. These are the different terms they were using for emotion or self-regulation in that context, and then the components of them. And generally what they found was that a lot of the self-regulation measures are substantially distinct from one another. So they're a little bit different and they're not super related all the time. So what they concluded is that self-regulation is a huge umbrella that encompasses many terms and requires multiple measures. So you're not going to fill out one survey that is the self-regulation survey. So think of it as a huge, much bigger than that little umbrella on the screen, a huge umbrella. Self-regulation is a huge umbrella that encompasses many other terms. And several of these key terms related to self-regulation have proven to be especially useful in children and adolescents. So in developmental psychology. Oh yeah, you want me to go back to the previous slide, Maria? Yeah. I'll give everybody a second. Okay, cool. So here are some of the words we talk about related to self-regulation. Working memory, we have the emotion regulation, engagement, delay of gratification. We're going to come back to these and I'll show you across the studies we're going to examine which self-regulation aspect they're looking at. Okay, so we're going to come back to this image. But again, think of self-regulation as a broad conceptual umbrella. If we need a very broad definition, this is taken from McClelland in 2015, self-regulation generally refers to taking in information, weighing choices and consequences, and making adaptive choices to attain a particular goal. All right, so it's taking in an event, the environment, information, weighing what you can do, and then making a choice towards a goal, towards some kind of goal. Sometimes this can be an unconscious goal. Fight or flight is really protection. It's an unconscious response. Other ones might be, I have the goal of getting an A in this class, so I'm going to take information, weigh choices towards that goal. So how does emotion regulation and self-regulation develop? Let's look at this across development. First, you have infancy. In this place, emotion regulation and just regulation in general is predominantly driven by an external agent. Usually this is your caregiver. It's marked by basic skill and limited effectiveness. So really, baby cries, mom regulates that. Mom calms them, or caregiver calms them down, helps them with that. Maybe they're in fear and they cry, caregiver helps them regulate that. Maybe they get hurt. A lot of times a caregiver is responding and calming them down, soothing them, singing to them. At this point in life, emotion regulation and self-regulation is driven by your caregiver. And then we go through, and generally we talk about it in toddlerhood, but it's really after infancy and before preschool. It becomes a dyadic experience that is eventually dominated by the child. So it's a recursive process where you have the child who is, if you think about it as a cross like this, the baby's not very good at regulating their emotions or regulating themselves. And the caregiver is really good at it. And as you go through time, the infant baby gets better and better at this process. And the caregiver has to do it less and less. So it's like they're working together to regulate the kid. So this might look like then when kids become a toddler, the baby could, or the toddler could fall down and cry and be really sad, get hurt. And then the mother comes over, or the caregiver comes over and says, I'm so sorry, and does some emotional reassurance for them. But at that point, the caregiver might say, I need you to take deep breaths. So the infant starts doing that. And so that's the infant trying to regulate itself, or the toddler. And so you see this become more and more to the point where generally in the preschool years, emotion regulation is driven by an individual in a social context. Preschool is a really fun time. If you ever get the chance to work with preschoolers, I highly recommend it. Everything's exciting. These regulatory skills, they just really became in control of them and can do them themselves. They're adorable. Centauri can definitely vouch for that. They are amazing. So during this in preschool classroom, kids are responsible to manage themselves. They're responsible to learn these skills. And you might see teachers saying, hey, you need to focus, you need to calm down, and the kids are responsible for doing that. And that's where you get into this self-regulation literature that we're talking about today. So what behavioral markers do we see in this? In infancy, we see the infant sucking their thumb, or like a boppy, or one of the things they put in your mouth for a baby. If a baby's crying, they put it in their mouth and they suck on it. Babies are soothed by others, and they show some interest in other people. In toddlerhood, they can be soothed by themselves using objects. So this is like having a blankie that you like sleeping with. The babies can feel, or the toddlers can feel soothed by the object they have, like a blankie, and then they'll go to sleep, right? Takes away fear, helps them regulate. And that's when you'll see those mothers having conversations about their emotions, or caregivers saying, hey, I need you to take deep breaths, think about how you're feeling, share that with me. What are you feeling right now? And then you get response to emotions as well. And then finally, in the preschool years, you see controlling of negative emotions. You might see taking on the perspective of others. You see a lot of preschool teachers saying, how do you think that makes your friend feel when you steal his toy? How does that make them feel? The interesting thing about preschoolers is you'll see them display emotions they're not actually feeling. So they'll feel like, I need to be excited right now. So they'll be excited even though they don't feel it. You also see them develop more strategies for dealing with those emotions. That's what it looks like for them to regulate that, or how that develops. So a couple important things. Emotion and self-regulation are socially determined. So we have social signals that help us generate and regulate our emotions. A lot of time this looks like facial expressions. I don't know if you guys do this, but I know for sure in my mom and dad, the faces that are I'm angry at you, or like the you're in trouble look, the I'm concerned for you look, and the I'm disappointed in you look, right? So if I was a kid and I would do something and I could see my parents' facial expression, I might know, ooh, that's the you're in trouble look. I'm about to get in trouble. I need to try not to get in trouble. Or, oh, they're concerned for my safety look. Maybe I need to step back. So we use signals to influence the quality and intensity of emotions in others. So in this case, my parents were using their social signal, i.e. facial expression, to show me what was socially appropriate and how I should react to that. And this is really how we acquire social norms. So we use these to say, now in settings where in college, for instance, if you go in, using your friend's facial expressions might be how you gauge if your joke is funny, if they want to go to an event with you, if you're saying something that's rude. We use those to understand how we're fitting in with society. So for social norms. Additionally, social interactions can change the emotions being experienced in the moment. So this is the idea of having a long conversation with a friend where, you know, you might talk about something fun, and then you talk about something where you disagree and you get angry at each other, and then you talk about something else. So your social interaction can change the emotions you're experiencing moment to moment. The example 2 is if you go to an event to see a celebrity and you're waiting, maybe you've been waiting for hours, and then finally the celebrity steps out. What if they come up to you and give you their autograph? It might change your emotions and get you really, really excited.
Bethany, some people wanted you to go back to the last slide.
Oh yeah. Okay, do you want me to go back to development and behavior, or is this good? I'll assume this is good. I'll slow down too. Okay. Okay, awesome. All right, so emotion and self-regulation is also very culturally determined. The culture we're in determines which emotions and behaviors are appropriate and which are inappropriate. So we might say, we know that in America, we live or a lot of American cultures might value extroversion or positive emotions, and it's more appropriate for us to express these emotions more than maybe other ones. It also guides us on what's appropriate and inappropriate. Sometimes anger might be an inappropriate emotion in some contexts. Other countries, it might be very, very socially acceptable to express anger in a certain way. Like I said, anger is a very interesting emotion because there's a lot of, it varies very much across different cultures. And then culture specifies how you should feel and behave. So not only the emotions you should experience and feel, but the manifestation or the emotion regulation that should happen. So this is from Eng, 2012. They were interested in looking at what does emotional expression or self-regulation look like across different cultures. So this is mean regulation, where the higher the score, the more these individuals were regulating themselves. Across here, they looked at East Asians in Japan. They looked at East Asians in America, East Asian Americans, and European Americans. The two things they looked at were cognitive reappraisal, so the internal process of involving changing your interpretation of an event or situation. So this is basically your internal processing of an event, all right? And then they also looked at suppression, which is inhibiting the behavioral component of an emotion. So this is suppressing your behavior. So maybe your facial expression. Perhaps in this case, it was facial expression. So they looked at it across these 3 different groups. And what they observed is that East Asians in Japan, note that the reappraisal looks similar across groups. So these groups were processing these generally the same way. What they found was that East Asians in Japan displayed the most suppressing of the behavioral component. Then East Asian Americans showed a little less of inhibiting their behavioral response to this event. And then European Americans had the least amount of suppression, or the least amount of regulation in response. So even though they were interpreting it in a similar way, there was less regulation in the European Americans, or the least amount. So self-regulation, we've talked about what it is, how it develops, the fact that it's socially and culturally determined, which is key. Another really important note about this is that self-regulation really tends to vary based on the degree and number of risk factors present in your life. So if you guys have heard of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale, it's ACEs. It's a scale that measures how many essentially risk factors or tough things you have going on in your life. And they've consistently found that the more you have, the more you are at risk for having a tough time when you're older, essentially. And so when you go through and have these piling on of risk factors, we know that it's the piling on that's really hard for kids. It's harder and harder to self-regulate. If you think about it, if you have to worry about a lot of other things in your life, it's probably hard to regulate yourself. Self-regulation, sort of like attachment, is really based on trust in a way, that I can trust that my environment will be consistent in all this stuff, and I can, by regulating myself, I'll do okay. So early childhood adversity is related to lower self-regulation through stress hormones and neural connectivity. And we know that lower socioeconomic status is related to lower self-regulation. This is really tough because we know self-regulation is related to a lot of positive outcomes. Yeah, Paul, absolutely. Also taking into consideration resiliency factors and resources available to these individuals. So self-regulation, we're going to see, is related to a lot of childhood outcomes or adult outcomes. But it's important to know that this does vary based on how many risk factors you have in your life. So I think it's a really, one thing I'm excited about is the ability to keep exploring this idea and work on it. Okay. So if you might have seen this video before, so we've talked about self-regulation, but why talk about it? So I want to explain this task really quick. This is the delay of gratification. So this is one aspect of self-regulation task. It's been linked to SAT scores and obesity, and it is culturally determined, which I'll get more into. Essentially what the marshmallow task is they take kids, generally preschool age, usually 2 to about 6 years old, and they put them in a room. And they say, okay, we're going to give you a marshmallow. Now you can have this marshmallow right now or whenever you want, but I'm going to leave. The researcher is going to leave the room. And when I come back, I'll give you another marshmallow if you didn't eat the first one. So the idea is you can have one reward now, but if you wait a certain amount of time, I'll double your reward. And what they do is they measure the amount of minutes before the child tastes that first marshmallow. And some get all the way through. They can make them wait up to 15 minutes. When you're 3, that's like half your life. It's a lot. So I'm gonna set out a poll. And I wanna know, think about yourself as a child, as a young preschooler, 3 to 5 years old. Say someone left you in a room with a marshmallow. How many minutes do you think you would have been able to wait before tasting that marshmallow?
I actually have a question.
Yeah, what's up, Dana?
I know that, this has been done in many different versions and many different studies, but I'm curious, in the original one, what were they told? Were they told you'll get a prize? Was the prize specified? Because you could say that, measuring whether or not they reach for the marshmallow or how long it takes could also be affected by what they imagine the prize to be. Because, if they think it's just a sticker, well, I'd rather have a marshmallow than a sticker, at my current age and also when I was a kid. So is that like a question that's been asked about it?
I know they've done a lot of work on since then on like what to use for the incentive because there's more food allergies now. So marshmallows don't always work.
Yeah.
So, and in some cases they did like nuts and the kids were like, okay. But in the original experiment, my understanding was that it was 2 marshmallows. So they knew like, I get a first one, I'll get a second marshmallow, and they tell them that.
Okay.
So you'd have to go back to the study to check. But from what I remember of it, it is actually a marshmallow.
Teddy bear. Ooh, okay, cool.
Yeah. Oh, Jacob, awesome. Someone said they do this in their lab with a wrapped present. Okay, tiny teddy bear, that's adorable. I don't know what the challenge on TikTok was for parents, but I might have to look that up. That sounds interesting.
It was like the same thing. It was kind of like the same thing where they would put like some sort of candy in front of their child and like record them, and the parents would be like, okay, like I'm coming back. And they would just wait to see if the child would like eat the treat or not.
Oh, interesting. That would be really fun. Yeah, absolutely. Here, let me share the results of the poll with you guys. Is that sharing? I don't know. Okay, so let's see. 30% said that 2 to 5 minutes. I probably would put myself as a young kid in the 2 to 5 minute range. 24% said 6 to 10, and then 34% said the full 15 minutes. Okay, so we're gonna watch this video really quick and see how this kid how this goes. This is probably one of my favorite all-time videos.
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something, and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
It's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay. So I'm gonna leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay? Okay. How'd you do? Did you do good? You did? You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So they'll take it and give you another one? Okay, now you can have both.
Oh, clearing your plate, yes. Okay. Yes, so that is the marshmallow test. I love that they made this video of it. It sounds like a couple of you have done the marshmallow test when you were a kid. This has been around for 20 to 30 years now. So what were some of the self-regulation strategies you saw in that video? Comment in the chat for me.
Well, one kid was banging his head on the table lightly.
Yes, yes. It was any type of distraction, right? Banging his head. My personal favorite are the two twins who are like dancing around it, turning it into a toy. That was pretty great. Looking around the room, smelling it, sniffing it, pretending it was something else. Yeah, and even what they do is anytime you taste it. So it's even, the kids were like, maybe I can get away with taking a little bit off, you know? So that would be the end of their time. So you see these kids using a lot of strategies not to eat that marshmallow. Pretty intense challenge. This guy did a great job, got the whole thing. But yeah, it's an adorable. I know, I do. My favorite, or one of my favorites, is the little girl who just straight up eat it. She was a little young for the experiment, but she's just like, I'm good with one. So generally why we talk about self-regulation is because it is linked to a lot of different outcomes. So self-regulation has been linked to academic achievement, internalizing social norms in children, physical and mental health, the physical health article is one of the group presentations. The other one is on culture of emotional expression. Definitely make sure you watch those. Motor skills and just developmental tasks, and then risk-taking in adolescence. On the flip side, dysregulation has been implicated in the opposite of a lot of these: behavior problems, depressive symptoms, mental health problems. So we're going to go over a few of those studies. So generally, this was one of your readings on Kachanska and colleagues from 1986. Temperament hasn't been linked to socialization a lot. Oh, go back. Yeah. Okay. So temperament, not a lot of research has looked at temperament fostering socialization. It's great because Sinchari is looking at that. So this article looks at 2 temperamental inhibitory systems. So it looks at passive inhibition, which it talks about as anxiety, shyness, fearfulness, and then active inhibition, which is essentially self-regulation. So what they're interested in here is inhibitory control related to how we internalize family and society standards, okay? So they're interested in, if you're able to inhibit your responses, to inhibit yourself better, do you more quickly as a child internalize the family and societal standards you're being raised in? All right, so this is from a larger study looking at the role of socialization and temperament in the development of conscience. So when we're looking at that big list of self-regulation traits, this is looking at inhibitory control. That's the self-regulatory trait we're looking at in this study, okay? So what they did was, it's a longitudinal study where they measured kids when they were toddlers, and then they came back and measured them as preschoolers. They used a comprehensive battery of inhibitory control measures. So they wanted to say, we want to measure inhibitory control from 2 sources. We're going to have researchers go into the classroom and observe these kids. And then we're going to give moms a questionnaire where they'll report on their kids' inhibitory control. We like to do this in psychology to have multiple sources, basically, for a concept. And then they measured internalization based on, let's see, they had the kids respond to mother and experimenters' requests. So they said, hey, can you take a seat or something, or can you do this? And they see if the kids do it. And then they looked at whether the kids were reluctant to violate standards of conduct, like wait in line, things like that. And so they did, in the analysis, they established reliability, validity, and all of that. So what they observed, our goal generally, variance is like the stuff that explains what's happening. So the goal of this study is to explain what's happening in internalizing in preschoolers, how they internalize norms. So the variance is like this pie where we're trying to cut out pieces and see what explains that. We found that their age and sex explained 16% of the internalizing. We found that the time 1, when they were toddlers, explained 4% of the variance in internalization. And then we found that inhibitory control as preschoolers explained 10% of that. So this was in the observational battery where researchers went in and observed the child. And so basically what this is saying is inhibitory control was significantly related as a toddler and a preschooler to internalizing social norms in preschool. So they totally explained 30% of the variance, which is pretty good. So they took a pie, they could explain 30% of what was going on in that pie. In contrast, these are the mother reports. So this is where the mothers fill out a survey about their child's inhibitory control. So what they found in that is that when they had mothers report on their kids' inhibitory control, that when they were toddlers, they explained 19% of the variance of internalizing social norms, and as preschoolers, 9% of the variance, and so 43%. So we see a little bit of difference, but in general, both say that inhibitory control is related to internalizing social norms. So what they concluded from this study is that temperament and emotion regulation play an important role in socialization and a child's understanding of social roles. They found that measurement matters. So they wanted to look at those two different reports. So they looked at if it was valid. So they looked at if the mother reports were related to how the researchers reported, and they found they were similar. And that we need to use multiple reports to examine these really, really tough concepts. They also examined gender differences and found that girls tended to have higher inhibitory control at the toddler age and preschooler age than boys. And so is this biological? Is this social? Generally, girls are socialized to inhibit more and to internalize social norms more. So generally, even in young individuals, we tend to see girls not allowed to run the same way or do things the same way as boys. And so across self-regulation research, we tend to find that girls have higher self-regulation than boys. Okay, self-regulation and mental health. So some researchers, this was actually a paper I was on, sought to understand, oh man, I can go back. Sorry guys, I'm going through too fast right now. Okay, I'm gonna move forward. Here, I'll just put everything out. Okay, so we also look at self-regulation related to mental health. So researchers were interested in looking at if self-regulation has a long-term effect into adolescence. So if you measure self-regulation in preschoolers, is it related to their mental health when they're in 5th grade and at age 15? We used a big data set for this one called the NICHG-SECCYD, the forever acronym of self-regulation. This is a huge data set. We actually talked about it in the attachment lecture. It's the study that was originally looking at childcare. And so in this study, we took 5 different constructs that fall under that umbrella of self-regulation, because we said, you know, you see in that 1996 article, no, you don't need to know the acronym. You see in that article, the past article, that they say we should measure these concepts in multiple ways. Yes. I'm convinced grad school is just like the school of acronyms and learning them. I've learned way too many for my taste. But yeah, that's a very long one. So in this study, we looked at self-regulation using these 5 constructs: delay of gratification, the ability to delay that gratification that was measured through the marshmallow test, impulsivity, the Stroop task, if you've heard of it, where we look at your impulses and how you respond. I actually had to take this when I got concussion testing done, the Stroop task. Sustained attention, can you keep your attention for a long time? Can you focus that attention to say, hey, focus on this, focus on that? And then your inhibitory control, how well can kids delay those impulses? So we took those 5 factors and put them into a big model of self-regulation. So if you look across our measures, these are some of the things we were looking at. So what we found in this study is that your self-regulation in preschool, all of those factors together, was significantly related to your mental health at grade 5 and your mental health at age 15. And it was a very significant effect. These were obviously related. Your mental health at grade 5 was also related to your mental health at age 15. But that self-regulation did predict these, to the point, one thing that's very important is every additional unit of self-regulation, so every additional unit you tested higher on self-regulation, was just over 1/4 of a standard deviation difference in mental health problems. So 1 standard up in self-regulation meant 1/4 standard down in mental health. So it is significantly related to mental health. Again, those were just the measures that I already told you about. So let's look across academic achievement. So this can also be found across academic achievement, where we said, okay, let's look at this at school readiness in a bunch of different factors. So we found that same measure, self-regulation at that age, preschool, was related to picture vocabulary, which is like literary skills, your math skills, applied problems, internalizing behavior, externalizing behavior, your social skills, and popularity at the same age. So kids with higher self-regulation experience higher achievement, higher social skills and popularity, and lower internalizing and externalizing behaviors at the same age. These results held also for first grade. So same line of results. You don't need to know the specific numbers or anything. And then at third grade, we saw the same line of results again. So again, your 54-month-old preschool self-regulation predicting all these factors. And then we included 2 other measures of academic achievement. And then these results held in 5th grade as well. And then at age 15, we do see some of the effects go away. It's still significantly related to your academic achievement, not significantly related to internalizing behaviors, but it was related to externalizing and not related to social, those factors as well. Okay. So as we can see, self-regulation is related to a lot of different outcomes. So what do we do? What do we do with this information if in preschool, your self-regulation can predict a lot of these factors? These are a couple of the ones that I've actually directly experienced and taught kids. So the PABS is an amazing model. It's a whole program, a whole thing for teachers. The one in Head Start that the kids use all the time is the song about being a star. So it's stop, take a deep breath, and relax. So it's really cute. Every single morning, the kids sing multiple songs. One of the songs they sing is this star song, and it says, if you want to stay, if you're feeling really angry and you need to relax, be a star. Take a deep breath, stop, take a deep breath, and relax. And the kids have a whole routine they do. It is so cute. The kids go stop, take a deep breath, and relax. They do the yoga, like when in yoga, when you do this, they do that. And seeing all these 3-year-olds in class do that big breath and relax, but it's teaching them to wait and basically allow emotion and self-regulation, to stop, take a deep breath, and relax. When I worked in the middle school classroom with behaviorally challenged kids, our favorite phrase to use was stop and think, because a lot of these kids really, really struggled with regulation. They could feel the emotions, feel everything, but they had a hard time regulating themselves. So our #1 phrase was stop and think, and just telling the kids, stop and think. And it would tell them, it'd be assigned to them, wait, think about what you're experiencing, and think about what you want to do. So it was a way of scaffolding that emotion and self-regulation, essentially. So if you are a future teacher, these are some of the things I really recommend, and even they're just very, very good. There's a lot of self-regulation, emotion regulation strategies out there. You can find a really cute video of the star song too, if you're interested. Okay, so we had another study that was one of the readings, and this is one of my favorites. Steinberg is an awesome adolescent researcher. So if we know this stuff about emotion regulation and self-regulation, we know that that's related to risk-taking in adolescence. So why do teenagers take more risks? We have a lot of kind of beliefs about this, about why adolescents tend to take more risks. We tend to think they're irrational. To think, oh, teenagers just aren't rational beings, what they're going through. Underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, yes, they're irrational. What they tend to find, though, in research is that adolescents are relatively rational when you talk to them about some of this stuff. We also wonder, oh, adolescents are just unaware of what's going to happen. But, you know, when you talk to adolescents, they might know what's happening. They might say, oh, I am kind of aware of what's going to happen. Well, maybe they're just not paying attention. You know, maybe they're just sky in the clouds, texting, whatever. But we also know that they are paying attention. It's not always that. And then the other one is teenagers maybe think they're invincible. You know, oh, nothing can affect me. But generally, the literature doesn't really find any of these. And then we say, oh, well, maybe it has to do with that we need to give them the right information. So maybe teenagers don't have the right information and they need to make appropriate decisions. We just as adults have been given more information over time. And maybe they just need to use this different information to make decisions. A great example of this is the DARE program. Did anybody go through the DARE program? Maybe not. It's yes. Okay, we got a few. Yeah. Okay, a lot of people wanted it. Yes. So Nancy Reagan, as her first lady thing, decided to focus on drugs, and she developed the DARE program. And the idea was we need to re-educate youth on drugs, therefore they will not do drugs. So it goes into this idea of providing information about risky behavior will change their behavior. It did not work. Yeah, totally ineffective. Unfortunately, what they found was that it was not significantly related to not doing drugs, essentially. And they spent millions and millions of dollars on this idea of just re-educating, basically. Generally, what the interesting thing is they find is that things like, so think about cigarettes, what they find is less access to these things is related to a reduction. So if cigarette prices go up, then teenagers tend to stop smoking cigarettes. So it's actually related to availability. So yeah, so Steinberg wanted to study this and say, okay, so we have all these conceptions about why adolescents take more risks. What might it be? And he came up with this idea that we have two systems, basically. First is the logical reasoning system. This is our perception of risk, our estimation of our vulnerability, and our general maturity. But this tends to develop by 16. This is the logical reasoning. This logical part of our brain actually develops by the age of 16. But his hypothesis was that we also have a psychosocial part of our brain. It says this is emotion regulation, impulse control, delay of gratification, peer pressure. They continue to mature into adulthood till like 25, 26 years old. So we have the logical piece, but it's that psychosocial piece that's missing in adolescence. And so this is essentially self-regulation, emotion regulation. We also know that peers, the reward center of the brain and the importance of peers are at an all-time, are close together in adolescence. So your peers are more rewarding. So somebody mentioned peer pressure in there, absolutely. So the psychosocial piece is also just our relationship with peers, emotion regulation. And so this formed the psychosocial maturation hypothesis, essentially what the last slide was talking about, that risk-taking is thought to be a product of two aspects of the brain, the social emotional piece, that's the psychosocial piece, and then the logical reasoning piece, the executive functioning piece. And during adolescence, the theory was that the social emotional piece, the psychosocial component, is much more dominant. And so the presence of peers makes risky behaviors and situations more rewarding for youth. By adulthood, they think that maybe that logical reasoning piece has come back and they've balanced and it can override the social emotional piece. So the presence of peers has less impact on your behavior. So there's a video, I think it's posted on our website. I'd highly recommend it on our course site. But if you haven't heard of Alan Alda, he's amazing. I love him. He's an actor. But he goes through and does this test where essentially they have teenagers drive a car on a road in this video game. And a light turns orange when they're driving through. And they have to decide, do I run the red light or do I stop? And randomly they have cars crash into you, essentially. Sometimes even if you run a red light, you'll get through. Sometimes a car will come in and you'll crash, essentially. And so the kid has to decide, do I slow down for the yellow light or do I drive through it? And they do the test where they have the kid go through and do it a couple times. And then they say, oh, we're bringing in your friends to watch you. All right, so I'm going to have 3 friends and they say hi to them on a monitor. And then the friends actually leave. But they do it again and they see, do they become riskier when they think their peers are present? All right. And so these kids are lying basically in an MRI machine. It's amazing. So what they found is that this is with a peer. So all the red is with peers. And then this is when they're alone, right? So in adolescence, they found this is how many risky decisions they made when they were alone. And this is how many they made about when they were with peers. So you see a huge increase of how many risky decisions they made when they thought their friends were watching them. And so then you see in young adults and adults, it's basically the same. Usually there wasn't a significant difference between the two. If you look at the number of crashes, adolescents did get in significantly more crashes when their peers watched versus when they were alone. And again, there wasn't a significant difference in young adulthood and adults. Okay, so what they concluded from this is that risk-taking in adolescence is normative and maybe biologically driven. So this is a normal part of who we are as teenagers, is that it's a normative process. And that if you really want to do an intervention on this, you need to focus on limiting opportunities for immature judgment. All right, so I grew up in a small town of 20,000. There was actually a curfew that for kids under 18. So if you were under 18, you had to be home by midnight. You know, if cops caught you, you could get in trouble. This is also why we have things like when you get a car, you have to drive alone for a certain amount of time. In Oregon, you have to drive your first 6 months without people in the car. I did not do that, but you, I think in Illinois it's a year is what I've heard, but you have a certain amount of time where they say, hey, we don't want your peers influencing you. Probably like literally look at this study. It'll kind of show you, yes, a year at Illinois. So limit opportunities for youth to make immature judgments. All right, so this could look like greater enforcement of alcohol and cigarette sales, more access to mental health and contraceptive services. And they want future research to look at the contextual factors that predict self-regulation. So it might be related to where you are, who's in the car with you, all of those different things. Okay, so do you want me to go back to any slides in lecture or anything like that before we do a group activity?
Can you go back to psychosocial maturation hypothesis, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Any others? Okay. So now we're going to do a group activity. So I want you guys to get in groups and share a Word doc, put everyone's name. I want you to choose a movie that you've all seen, like some great ones are like Breakfast Club or Sky High is a funny one, but any movie that you guys have all seen, and choose 2 characters. Write a brief summary of the movie and then those characters. And I want you to describe instances for each character and when they regulated their emotions and when they self-regulated. So you can see this a lot, even in superhero movies, you see this a lot. So definitely go through. So let me create the breakout rooms. And then what I'll say is after that, you can take off. So do the activity together and then take off. Sanchari and I will stay in the main room if you have any questions, so feel free to come back. But otherwise, I hope you have a great week and I'll see you next week, okay? So I'm going to open all rooms.